Hey YouTube, I know it's been a bit. The tarot study series is still progressing, but I decided to go a little deeper into my study for each card, which I think will ultimately make the series better for you, the viewer. But that does mean it's going to take me a little longer to get things up and running again. And then once I do, I think the cards themselves should flow pretty quickly. But I wanted to go ahead and make a little video here based on a reading that I was doing for myself earlier today because I wanted to show a particular technique that, well, I don't know if I'd even call it a particular technique, but a way of working with different decks that I have sort of been evolving over time that I thought might be interesting to folks and might be a little good tied over while I'm working on some series. So what you see here is a reading, again, that I did for myself with 3 different tarot decks and 2 different oracles. And this method is sort of, I would say it has evolved from working with Kellyanne's Sacred Patchwork method, which is really cool. I'll try to find that and leave a link below, as well as some of Boho Tarot's videos about working with tarot and oracle together. And what I've started doing is using a grid layout like this. And generally speaking, I will either go left to right or up to down in terms of the flow of the reading itself, and then use the other direction for different decks. So in this case, I'm using a vertical layout. Examples where I might use a horizontal layout would be a reading that deals with chronology, something over time, or maybe more like causality, or in some cases, maybe choosing between different options I might put left and right. But I tend to sort of default to a vertical because I like to start in the center, and then if questions come up that are more like root, unconsciousness, what's underneath, I would go below. If questions come up that are more conscious, more future-oriented, or like action steps, then I would tend to go up. And this could obviously be, I shouldn't say obviously, you'll see in a minute that it's obvious, that I'm not working with any particular grid size here. So we could take over the whole floor, the whole carpet, and use 20 decks if we wanted to. It doesn't really matter. But I like to start at the center. So I started here, and I'm going to kind of talk you through this reading, not in full detail necessarily of my personal circumstances, but I think some context will be helpful. So I like to start at the center and pick kind of a focal deck. So in this case, it is the amazing Meraki Tarot that I've been working with in depth this lunation cycle. So I started with this deck. And in this case, I was doing a reading about, I was doing some shadow work around my craving for external validation. So I start with a kind of whatever question is really like getting at me the most. So in this case, the question that I started with was kind of what is the root of my craving for external validation? Where does that come from? So I started by laying down a card from the Meraki Tarot, and I got the Page of Pentacles, which is a little more is particularly playful in this deck. You can see the bunnies jumping around in circles. It really like engaging with their environment, taking things step by step. That's some of the, what the guidebook says about that card. I tend to think of Page of Pentacles as being kind of a focused study, but here I'm seeing it a little more playful, a little more like even in the kind of more of a relationship with the Page of Cups as well. So I saw this card and I was like, okay, what is the root of my craving for external validation? Okay, well, one kind of simple possibility could be that there's something around inner child. A real obvious thing is for me is that I've been doing inner child work around how I had a really strong desire for love and attention that was not always met in the ways that I wanted it to be. So, you know, a simple wham bam, thank you ma'am answer might be that the root of my craving for external validation comes from childhood. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily tell me all that much new. And I was kind of curious about what this very playful imagery might mean in the context of the reading. And so from the center card, I ask the same question, and I think in my mind I'm sort of thinking sort of clarifiers, but I'm also just asking the question again of a couple of different tarot decks. So in this case, I used 2 additional tarot decks. I didn't give any particular meaning to the decks I chose or to the positions, but you certainly could do something where, for example, you have one deck where you look at the light side and one deck where you look at the shadow side of a question, or you could have, you know, a deck to represent each element. So you could have particular meanings. In this case, I just sort of picked a couple decks that I'm working with alongside the Meraki. So over here, you'll see some cards from the Spacious Tarot. And then here on the left, you'll see, this doesn't actually have the name, it's just the bag, but from Inner Hue, the Lumina Tarot. So I decided to use these decks because I thought they resonated well with the Meraki, and they had slightly different energies to offer. So I put down these cards, and right away I noticed that I got the 2 of Swords and the 4 of Pentacles reversed, and that those 2 cards, in my interpretation, have a different, both deal with boundaries in a different way. So that resonance across 2 different decks, giving me not the same card, but a related card, made me think, that's really interesting. I think there's something here about the way my maybe not having sufficient boundaries, or tending to let my boundaries bleed over with the 2 reversed cards, might be involved in why I seek validation, because I may not be either allowing time for this inner child self, or it may just be that my inner child self is like really generous. This is something I know about my inner child self, is that it would give anything for a best friend. And so maybe there's sort of a like a people-pleasing sort of too muchness to it. And then what was really interesting is that I decided to do some oracle cards, and actually started with the left and then I added the right after. So on the left, you can see some cards from the Prairie Majesty Oracle, which is a deck I'm really enjoying working with. And they have nice big keywords here, so you can immediately see the keyword is warble, but you also can see at the top, question, am I singing my song? So the minute I saw this oracle card, it put some more clarity on it for me. And this often happens for me with tarot and oracle, especially when I'm not quite sure like which interpretation of a particular tarot card, or like how I want to read something, or what's intuitively coming to me. Combining it with other tarot cards can help, but also a lot of times an oracle kind of pulls it together. So this one asking, am I singing my song, makes me think, oh, okay, there's something here with the root of, it kind of pulled everything together, because it made me realize, oh, okay, so the root of my craving for external validation is coming from not just draining my own resources and not like letting this inner child self to thrive, but actually I see a correspondence between these two, and the idea that like what I would want to do without socialization, all the drag downs that can happen from responsibility, which might be represented by what my inner child would want to play with and study and really focus on, is being sapped by other things demanding my attention and resources. And that made a lot of sense to me. And suddenly I was like, okay, I see where this is going. I also decided specifically to pull from the Phenomena Oracle. I hope I said that right. I think it's Phenomena, not Phenomenon. Let's check. Yes, Phenomena. It's a Jespot deck. Cracked Amethyst. There's the backs. So you can see that there are various sort of weather and astrological type events in this deck. So this was like an example of a very specific one, whereas the Prairie Majesty is tying together the reading and giving kind of a theme to each row and each question that I asked. I pulled one from the Phenomena Oracle. It's basically just, weather. It's like, what is the weather of this question? What is the like temperature? Where are things? And here I see wind. So I'm not going to go through this whole reading, but that's the basic idea, where I grabbed from multiple decks. And I'm going to tell you what the bottom and the top rows represent, and then show some other cool like synchronicities that are examples of why this method can be pretty cool. So at the bottom, I asked, so I already went to what is the root, but I wanted to go one layer deeper. So I asked sort of what is underneath. That's a question I often ask the tarot. And credit to Lindsay Mack for helping me think of that question in one of her spreads. But I use it for everything now. So I will ask, what is underneath that? What is underneath that? And I might even do 2-3 layers of what is underneath that. And so in pulling this row, what was really powerful is, of course, the devil jumped out. So, and you can even see visually, you have these, happy jumping bunnies, but, and then, we already know that this might represent something around, like not making enough time for that. And then what's underneath that is the sort of shrieking of the inner ego self represented by the devil, saying this is what you should do, this is what you have to do, kind of social conditioning. And similarly, when I pulled the oracle cards, just like in the middle, the 2 oracle cards really like lent some clarity, but had a very similar theme in the context of this reading. So, you've got this pain of the 3 of Swords. You've got this amazing, one of my favorite cards in the Lumina, which is a deck I'm still trying to figure out if I'm friends with, but this Judgment card, I love the Pluto and the kind of blocked out light. So as soon as I saw that and saw that reversed, all I can think of is, oh my God, obviously like unprocessed pain, unprocessed conditioning. There's some unprocessed stuff underneath, unprocessed trauma, maybe around being able to focus on what I wanted to focus on, underneath being rejected, underneath of all that, there is still some heavy stuff that needs to be processed. And so what was cool about that one specifically is then when we got up to the upper row, you can see Judgment again. So the upper row, the question I asked was, what was it? It was basically about next steps, but specifically, I believe what I asked was, how can I invite, oh, I wish I could remember the question because it was actually pretty good, but it was something like, how can I invite, I'm not going to think of it. Anyway, basically, what are the best ways to improve things going forward? So like, how can I invite, it was healing. How can I invite healing and transformation? That's right. So like, what are the next steps I should take? What's my immediate focus next towards healing and transformation? And, I could talk about all the cards here, but I specifically wanted to point out that Judgment is up there too, and it's a different deck. So this is the one nice thing about using multiple tarot decks and multiple oracle decks, depending on the oracles. Obviously, oracle decks can be all sorts of themes, but you can have the same thing repeated, and that's not possible with a single deck. So, most single decks, there probably are decks that have repeater cards intentionally for artistic purposes, but here we have this one version of Judgment, and it's reversed, and you can, like, I can feel the pain, I can feel the shadow, I can feel the, like, blocked out parts of myself in this card. And then not only is this one upright, but it's a very different image. So in the Spacious Tarot, you have this gorgeous sort of doorway to something else, and you can see that all the trees are bending over and sort of creating this archway. And there might be some difficulty. We don't necessarily know, like, it looks like there's some snow. These trees might be kind of windblown, but it's leading into a brighter future. And it's that rainbowiness visually, you can kind of see echoed in the way the light is hidden in this Judgment card. So it was just a really clear feeling of like, okay, I need to process that pain. I need to work with that pain so that I can go through the door. So you can see again, like visually, sometimes you'll just kind of have that sense. Another example of that was, I looked in the guidebook for what looks like a mistake almost, but the Prairie Majesty actually has a few cards that instead of this format, it's a cosmic thing. And so the star in this is, some of the keywords we're talking about making connections, drawing connections, synthesis, like that kind of thing. And then I love that this High Priestess has those overlapping Venn diagram kind of circles with the moon in the middle and these two figures. And so it really, obviously, to the high priestess, but it really made me think of the high priestess in a different way. Think about the intuitive ways that we make connections and find the right thing for ourselves through that. So I thought that was really cool. And then finally, one thing I just wanted to show that was kind of neat in the phenomena cards is these two at the bottom. I thought it was interesting that you had wind as at the root. The kind of energy of the root is windy, and then all the way into a tornado, which showed up reversed. So that's another just example of like a powerful, visually you can see the relationship between. So I would really encourage you, if you are interested, to try something like this. Again, it doesn't really matter which direction you go, up, down, left, right, but you want to pick one of the two. You want to pick an axis basically for the question. So in my example, each row represents a question. And then you want to use the other direction for your different decks. Of course, you don't have to lay them out this way. You could put Oracle in the middle. You could have more Oracle than Tarot. There's all sorts of ways you could do this. I mentioned that you could use specific decks like I did with the phenomena. You might use like an astrology deck or a gem deck or a rune deck, depending on what you're familiar with. You might use affirmation cards instead of Oracle cards. Really there are plenty of options here. And what I like about starting in the center, which you don't have to, but if you have a lot of space and you start in the center, then you can expand as much as you like. So obviously I have a table here. I'm a little limited. It looks kind of infinite with my wall. That's kind of neat. But I do have limited space here. However, I can fit probably 2 more rows here. So if I did this row and then thought, ooh, I need to know what's underneath that, then I could do another row. And I didn't have to plan that in advance. So yeah, and you could get more creative. You could also do like spokes of a wheel, really play with it, see what's fun for you. But I hope you enjoy this little thing. And if you are interested in receiving a reading from me, including a big old multi-card patchwork ridiculousness reading, I am going to be opening up for written and potentially recorded readings very soon. So if you're curious about that, you can go ahead and make sure you're subscribed to my newsletter, link below. Patrons, of course, will get the first go. Patreon.com/queermagical, also below. So there are low rates of contribution that can get you both discounts and early access to readings. And of course, I will announce on my social media at Queer Magical on Instagram and on Twitter. If you are really excited about this and would like a reading and want to tell me about it, then you can totally message me on social media, and I will make sure to get the word out to you when that is available.